told that we're facing a 100-year war that will last generation after generation. In this film, we will explore who pulls the strings and who benefits from the dark spectacle of modern warfare. We will answer the question, do the people know how they are controlled? Do they understand the systems of power that surround them? The modern propaganda machines of public relations that wash their brains and fill their minds full of ball games and mindless fluff.
The informant, the informant, a fellow named Salam, a 43-year-old former Egyptian army officer, he was given the assignment to put the bomb together, and he went to his supervisor, his FBI supervisor, and said, we're going to put a dummy bomb in here, right? And the FBI supervisor said, no, we're going to put a real bomb. Unfortunately for them, there were only 6 people killed, not enough to pass the legislation. So what happened is 2 years later, April 19, 1995, down comes Oklahoma City Murrah building, 168 people killed. 1 year later, the anti-terrorism legislation that takes away many of our constitutional rights and civil liberties is passed.
We have found out from our time in the services that there are certain people in the press who work as agents of influence of the intelligence services. In Britain, it's very easy to reward people with privileges, with contracts, with honours, with appointments to the House of Lords, with knighthoods and so on. So no money has to change hands, but those people know very clearly that they have a job to put out propaganda on behalf of the services.
When Congress informed Bush that secret arrest, secret detention, and torture was illegal, he simply had his Attorney General, Alberto Gonzales, issuing a policy paper claiming that it was lawful. Known as the infamous torture memos, Gonzales said that they would simply stop calling it torture and call it pressure, and that if someone died in custody from torture, that was acceptable. But White House counsel John Yoo went even further. In memos that he wrote for the president that were used by the military as their authority to engage in torture, he stated that they could even torture small children in front of their parents, in some cases sexually. And in another shocking turn, President Bush has taken to signing pieces of legislation that haven't even passed the Congress. President Bush was also caught engaging in warrantless searches using the National Security Agency to spy on the American people. Bush claimed that he had executive authority to ignore any federal law he wished. The 1878 Posse Comitatus law bars the military from engaging in law enforcement activities against the American people. Bush was caught using the Defense Intelligence Agency, a branch of the Pentagon, to spy on peaceful anti-war activists. He again claimed that he was above the law. Bush then claimed that the Constitution gave him the right to spy on the American people. Of course, the Constitution and Bill of Rights says the exact opposite. In the midst of the scandal, the retiring head of the National Security Agency went before the National Press Club and informed everyone that there was no need of a warrant in America. He chastised a reporter who claimed that you needed probable cause to search someone. He said all that was needed was that it be, quote, reasonable, and the government would decide what was reasonable. While in London, I learned that Parliament had just passed a law that would ban any type of free speech within several miles around the British Parliament building.
This arrangement, unannounced to the public, unregulated by Congress, merges the United States, Mexico, and Canada into one entity, erasing all borders. It's called the North American Union, and you might want to ask yourself why you've never heard of this. This isn't some trade agreement. It is a total removal of sovereignty from these countries, which will also result in a completely new currency called the Amero.
The Amero is the proposed new currency for the North American community, which is being developed right now between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico to make a borderless community, much like the EU, and the dollar, Canadian dollar, U.S. dollar, and the Mexican peso replaced by the Amero.
By default of this agreement, the American Constitution will eventually be obsolete.
George W. Bush. It's a sick joke. Who really stands to gain from this terrorism? The evidence is clear. The forces of the New World Order. Now let's talk about terrorism.
Let's talk now about terrorism and about those who see violence against innocent civilians as a legitimate means, in their view, to achieve their ends.
This new law that I signed today will allow surveillance of all communications used by terrorists, including emails, the internet, and cell phones.
The answer is yes. It's a war we have to win if we're going to protect the people of this country. I think the real issue is, what do we sacrifice, what do we give up in the process? So there is going to be a continuing trade-off between security and liberty and freedom going forward in the 21st century.
In the 20th and 21st century, inspection of any major terrorist event reveals that it is actually governments financing terrorist organizations to get a desired political outcome, to condition their population to accept higher levels of control. You've seen Hitler, Stalin, Mao, you've seen them all do it throughout the 20th century. And now in the 21st century, they're telling us it's going to be the century of terror and the century of a new world order. Look at the U.S. government. They tell us to give up our rights while our borders stay wide open, while tens of millions of people pour across our borders, come in through our ports, and land on airplanes. They have the nerve to tell American citizens that we must accept a national ID card in the name of safety. Use some common sense. The government tells us to leave the borders open even after September 11th and then treats us like slaves. Doesn't make any sense unless you're a slave master. You see, ladies and gentlemen, you have been declared the terrorist. You're looking at an FBI flyer, and they've gone out nationwide, where the FBI actually states that Christians, conservatives, gun owners are part of terrorist organizations. Defenders of the U.S. Constitution are listed as terrorists. If police encounter them, call the FBI anti-terrorism hotline immediately. Even defenders of the U.S. Constitution, people that make numerous references to the U.S. Constitution. Wait a minute, I thought police swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. Not in the new America, not with an America with a big fat K. Face the facts, America. You are the terrorist. West Virginia, Christians a hate group. They found out the FBI and law enforcement schools across the state, and it's going on around the country, are teaching them that Christians, period, are hate criminals, are part of a terrorist group if they believe in a second coming of Christ. And all this comes right out of the Project Megiddo report. Project Megiddo report, where they list homeschoolers, gun owners, anybody that cares about freedom, anyone that believes in Jesus Christ, anyone that believes in a second coming. Again, where did the First Amendment go? Anyone that discusses a New World Order conspiracy theory. Well, you've heard world leaders say a New World Order throughout this documentary. Anyone that talks about a New World Order takeover. The evidence is clear. If you resist the New World Order takeover, you're being demonized as a hate criminal. Look, it lists homeschoolers as terrorists. Remember, if you say New World Order, you're a terrorist. All the evidence shows it's the feds killing people, 3,000 plus at the World Trade Center and Pentagon. Here's Bush signing the USA Patriot Act that literally eviscerated the Constitution and Bill of Rights. Section 213 delays warrants. It means they can sneak in your house for any reason, take whatever they want, and never even tell you they were there. But you're like, oh, that's okay. There's a sunset clause. Well, if you look at that subsection, all of the key areas that violate your constitutional rights, there are no sunset provisions. Out of 1,016 sections, 802 has to be the most frightening. You see, the definition of domestic terrorism is anyone that is involved in acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state. Under their definition, jaywalking is now a terrorist action. This is an absolute outrage.
Is there a chance that some of your civil liberties may slip while we guarantee the security of this country? Maybe. Maybe.
A Virginia anti-terror training manual lists property rights activists as potential terrorists. A Texas manual lists those wearing Levi's jeans, having cell phones, and who are, quote, friendly towards the police as potential terrorists. In Arizona, they list those that make frequent references to the U.S. Constitution as potential terrorists. All of these guidelines have been produced by the federal government and distributed at the state level. The federal government itself has told police to be on the lookout for drivers who have road almanacs or driver atlases. All across the planet, governments are restricting free speech and setting up so-called free speech zones to stop their populations from demonstrating. Did you ever think you'd see the government talking about torture and lauding the virtues of it? Well, now it's actually happening in hundreds of publications, and if you're not for torture, you're with Al-Qaeda. Why, even phony liberals like Alan Dershowitz have been publicly peddling it, telling us it's time for us to reassess our laws and accept torture. But for the terrorist, of course. But the evidence shows that we are now the terrorists. They talk about using cattle prods and rubber hoses on people. And who's going to do the torturing? FEMA, the Ministry of Love. All those years we warned people about FEMA.
President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it. And he took the step without approval from either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States.
If Bilderberg succeeds, America falls. All the victimized countries